Okay. So we're Team Murmuration, and this semester we were studying homelessness in Pittsburgh as a wicked problem, and here are some of the things that we found. So this is homelessness in Pittsburgh today. At any given time, about 1,100 people in the county are experiencing it. Unsheltered numbers are up over 40% in the last year, and the county only has 762 shelter beds. Pennsylvania's minimum wage is $7.25, but the wage needed for a two-bedroom is almost $28 an hour. And the burden is not evenly distributed. The county's 14% Black, but Black residents are almost two-thirds of the families in shelters. So this is what we found. Homelessness is a problem, but it's part of a bigger pattern. The wage gap we saw is not a glitch. No one can work their way out of that. Pittsburgh's largest employers, UPMC, Pitt, CMU, hold mostly tax-exempt campuses around historically redlined Black neighborhoods. They pull wages out, premiums, and tuition while most of their property stays off local tax rolls. In the last 2 years, the response has mostly been about sweeps and criminalization. Redlining drew the map in the 1930s. Evictions, cost burdens, and health gaps still cluster around the same lines. What we are proposing is a framework that we're calling Healing Commons Pittsburgh, a transition from repair to belonging with three phases that overlap. Right now, we're more about stabilizing. Over the next decade or so, Pittsburgh really needs a structural shift. And over the long horizon, we're aiming for a Pittsburgh where housing is a commons, care is built into neighborhoods, and no one is without place. But before we get into what Pittsburgh could be, we would like to show you how we got here. So this board traces about 500 years of decisions on this land and region about who's allowed to live on it, move through it, or be pushed off of it. Every era you see the same themes repeating: exclusion, confinement, criminalization, classification, racial subjugation, and collective care. And here is how it starts. What we now call homelessness didn't exist on this land in the way that we see it today. It becomes possible when two things are happening at once: the exclusion and removal of indigenous peoples from their land, and the racial subjugation of people brought here enslaved to work it. So from the beginning, the system sorts people into who belongs and who is treated as expendable and movable. And if we fast forward to the mid 1800s, the Lower Hill District used to be a center for free Black life in Western Pennsylvania with churches, businesses, and the Underground Railroad safe houses. This is collective care and resistance on stolen land. And then here, through the 20th century, the mechanism behind today's housing crisis gets locked in, industrial wealth concentrates in downtown. And in 1937, the federal government draws lines, red lines, maps, classifying neighborhoods of those worthy of investment and those that are not. So when you put this together, this is not really random. It's what a long history of pattern produces.
This next step shows us what the system looks like today, five connected domains working together to produce the same result. First, we map the problem itself across the different domains, and what that showed us is that homelessness in Pittsburgh isn't coming from one single failure, but it's being produced across the entire system. For example, when we take a look at the economic thread, you can see how eviction, unaffordable rent, and the lack of shelter all push people toward the street. And once they're there, the system makes it harder for them to get back into housing. Then, in the social thread, we see how the response to the problem of homelessness is fragmented. People have to move through separate institutions for shelter, benefits, documents, and healthcare, which means that the system is managing homelessness instead of actually resolving it. That's the system. It's reproducing what it's designed to produce, and all the connections concentrate in the same neighborhoods we just talked about, the ones that were redlined in 1937. After looking at the problem of homelessness through different lenses, we shift to understanding the problem itself in the view of the people, institutions, and the power structures that shape it. In other words, we move from what the crisis looks like to who has the power to produce, maintain, or change it. The stakeholder map shows how in Pittsburgh is not just a personal struggle, but it is produced by the system itself. Housing is too expensive for the wages that people earn. Funding, political timelines, and shelter rules keeps people in instability instead of moving them into real housing. At the top of the spectrum, actors like the mayor, city council, DHS leadership, and URA are the ones that set the rules, funding flows, and zoning conditions that everyone has to work within. In the middle, stakeholders with moderate power like hospitals and institutions, while they may be the largest employers, they influence where people can live, where shelters can go, and what counts as a livable city. But they still operate inside those larger rules that are set by the groups with the most power. While they may understand the problem itself, they do not respond to it. Now, this is where the hierarchy of power and consequences of decision making converge. Groups like service providers, caseworkers, police, and community organizations are the ones that are carrying out the response and absorbing the burden, even though they can't change the system itself. Neighborhoods like the Hill District, Homewood, Manchester, and the North Side are the same ones that were redlined in 1937, denied investment, and still denied a voice. At the bottom, people experiencing homelessness, families, youth, and people exiting incarceration are the ones that are affected the most but least represented in the decisions that shape their lives. They have no way of being a part of the decisions that are made. The system is designed so that the people with the most power set the conditions, and the people with the least absorb the consequences, and short term fixes only move the problem around instead of solving it. So, this is where we start to get specific. What would the ecology of interventions look like across scales and across some things that need to happen now versus what we can build over decades? Now that we've mapped the problem and the stakeholders, what could the full ecology of interventions look like? Through the lens of repair, the idea isn't just to imagine what comes next, it's to respond to what's already been taken away. Working with themes of interventions such as safe rest and stabilization, community hubs as the bridge, anchor-backed housing justice, and connected commons, we have imagined what repair would look like at each scale from the household to the planet. At the most immediate level, there's safe rest and stabilization. That means places where people can safely sleep, access sanitation, and connect to outreach without the threat of sweeps, plus document and recovery support so that people can actually re-enter the system. Then we move into community hubs as the bridge. These are trusted neighborhood spaces where healthcare, mental health support, meals, housing, navigation, and peer support all happen together, especially through people with lived experience who are part of the change itself. The third piece is anchor-backed housing justice. This is where institutions like UPMC, PIT, and CMU are not just contributing voluntarily, but being part of a real reinvestment into funds intended for eviction defense, community land trust, and care hubs that we mentioned previously. Finally, the connected commons. These are ways to make sure that all the community assets are linked instead of isolated so that they can share resources, fill gaps, and connect Pittsburgh's work to other cities facing the same pattern. So this isn't just a list of problems, it's a connected ecology where each piece supports the others and helps people move the whole system toward repair. Each piece depends on the others, and the healing happens because people have a place to land.
So, what can the future of Pittsburgh be? Assignment 4 is where we attempt to answer that by identifying key conditions that would need to change over time, organized through 5 connected themes. So, this is where we stepped away from individual interventions and mapped a long-term transition pathway for Pittsburgh. Rather than organizing ideas by specific solutions, we grouped what we learned into 5 connected themes that describe how change would need to happen across the system. Land and housing as commons, governance and self-determination, care and healing, belonging and place, and repair, memory, and learning. This helped us see homelessness not as a single issue, but as something produced by relationships between land, decision-making power, and care systems. We then mapped each theme across multiple scales, from the household to the planet. Housing insecurity is not only shaped at the city level, but also by regional policy, institutional influence, and broader economic systems that determine how land is owned, governed, and valued. Looking across scales helped us identify where change would need to happen in coordination rather than isolated interventions. In the near term, the focus is repair, acknowledging harm caused by displacement and institutional extraction. In the midterm, commons-based housing and community care systems begin to stabilize neighborhoods and keep resources locally controlled. And in the long term, the goal is belonging, where housing insecurity is prevented through shared systems of land stewardship, governance, and care. Instead of proposing one solution, we mapped a sequence of conditions that build on each other over time. The goal is not just to respond to homelessness, but to change the structures that produce it. And a few things we want to name before we finish. When we first began, we thought we were studying homelessness, but what we ended up studying was who decides what happens on land in Pittsburgh and how the same neighborhoods have borne the cost of those decisions for 200 years. The pattern is racial, spatial, and structural, and homelessness is just one of the places that this shows up. We also wanted to be honest, since all of our mapping came from research alone. We didn't talk to real people, such as the people in the neighborhoods, the organizations already doing this work, and the institutions we're proposing to bind. If we did this again, we'd start there. And finally, we looked at Pittsburgh through the lens of homelessness. If we started somewhere else, the picture would probably look different. There are priorities and pressures in the city we didn't study, and part of what we'd want to know is what else is going on and whether what we found would still hold. Thank you.
Excellent. Really, really well done, everyone. So before Gideon and I weigh in, are there comments or questions from the class, the other teams? Anybody see any intersections with your problem?
I think obviously downtown blight and homelessness go hand in hand. And it was cool to see like on y'all's like more of the historical mapping, how many like overlaps there were with our work. And I thought that was really interesting. I also liked how you like framed the presentation where you like gave the facts, talked about the future, and then talked about your process. I thought that was very helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Gid, would you like to make some comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought that was great as well. One thing I particularly like, I think you did it in all your assignments, is the way you picked out, or nearly all of them, common threads, narrative threads that run throughout, or themes, if you like, that run through. And I think that really helps bring order to the whole thing and help people understand the maps. And that was one particularly nice touch. There was an incredible amount of detail in all your assignments, I thought, and it was always very well referenced. I think so. Yeah, it felt very grounded. And not only was there an incredible amount of detail, I think you somehow managed to find a way of bringing order to all that detail and making it easy for someone without much knowledge of the situation just to find their way into it and without getting lost in a pile of spaghetti. So yeah, very good.
Yeah, to build on what Gideon said, I think so often in practice and in this class, you see people that have undertaken a massive amount of research over an entire semester. And having seen it, we know the thinking and the research is there, but somehow when it comes to trying to condense that into a short, clear, yet impactful presentation, that's a whole other ball of wax, and it can be weak. This is a perfect example, I think, of having constructed the arc of a story. You found the right language and tone to present it in. And even though you had different voices presenting, it felt coherent. It felt like the story hung together. And there's a real art, as Gideon said, to pulling out a few of the thousands of facts that you could have highlighted. I think you did that exactly right. And I think your conclusion of what the problem actually was excellent. There are so many layers in that reframing. And I think if you go on to present this to other people, that is a systemic insight. That is exactly what this course was intended to do, is to get us to see a problem, try and get our hands around it, but then open up the aperture and the context to include the past and the future, which you absolutely did. And I think, as Caroline mentioned, I thought it was very effective to put the conclusions not at the end, but toward the end and end on the future. That was such a good decision, and it leaves everybody with hope instead of despair, especially in this moment we're all living through. But you can also see how these visual maps that took you so long to create can be used incredibly effective within Miro by just zooming in and showing pieces of them. Far, far more effective than if you had just done a series of stills, because people can see how much is there and they know that they're only seeing a little tidbit or a highlight. So I think if this had been presented to the mayor's office, everyone would have the same reaction. Where are those maps? I want to see those. And I can't think of a single thing really that I'd change. I mean, one question I have that has plagued me for years as we see it show up in so many wicked problems in this country with its unique history is, what can be done to expunge this redlining practice and the data, mountains of data in which it has insinuated itself? What can we do about that? Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
Not in this class, but in this other class I took, it was more so that data could never be without bias. You can
Yeah.
try to de-bias it, but
Mhm.
I actually wonder if you looked at even de-biased data and you map it to policies in place at the time,
Mhm.
would if you did gave things different weights due to policies that were ableist, racist, sexist, etc. at the time, what
Yeah.
would that result be? And I don't have the answer, but it is
Mhm.
something that I want to it's not going to be my PhD, so don't say it. It's something that I want to dig into further as we get deeper and deeper into AI.
Yeah. I think that raises one final thing worth mentioning. We ran a course similar to this years and years ago at Schumacher College. We were co-teaching it, and it was about envisioning a future civilization. And this one group did an amazing thing. They lived on an island with a volcano. And every year, the ritual was to climb to the top of the volcano. And they threw all of the laws that governed the civilization into the volcano, and they started anew because they realized that things would no longer be relevant and that they had to be reconsidered. And I think that that's what you're talking about apropos of policies. You know, what is appropriate now at this particular moment in time in this particular place may not be relevant in the near, mid, or long term. So how do we build that continual revisiting and possible evolution into the laws and the rules we make for ourselves? Excellent presentation, you guys. Thank you again.
Yeah. Just making sure. Okay.
We are Team Autopoiesis. My name is Chloe, and our team members are Mariah, Piranchi, and Ramin. And today we're going to be talking about bridge vulnerability in Pittsburgh. I'd like to start by taking us to 2075. Imagine you're walking across a bridge in the Hill District. The wind is coming off the Allegheny. Below you, the river is running clearer than it has in 100 years. You pass a woman leaning against the railing with a tablet. She is a part of the Watershed Stewardship Corps. Her observations from this morning: a small vibration she felt at the northeast joint, A sediment color shift she noticed near the West Pier are already in the governance dashboard that every Pittsburgher can read. Tonight there is a meeting. The Pittsburgh River Commons Governance Network convenes every month. The woman chairing it lives 4 blocks from here. When she was a child, her grandmother used to time her route to dialysis around this bridge, choosing the longer way on bad weather days. Not because she was told to, but because she knew the bridge better than the inspectors did. That grandmother never got to sit at the governance table. Her granddaughter chairs it. The knowledge did not change. The system that can receive the knowledge did. That is where we are going. Now let us tell you how we got there.
We started by mapping bridge vulnerability as a wicked problem using the STEEP framework. What we found is that failure is not caused by one issue, it comes from multiple systems working together. Economically, there is a constant funding gap and a growing power backlog of repairs. Socially, there is distrust and very little public participation. Technically, inspections generate data, but that data does not lead to action. Environmentally, both gradual worsening and sudden collapse damage river ecosystem. And politically, ownership is fragmented, so no one is fully accountable. These conditions reinforce each other through 3 loops. First, underfunding leads to failure, which increases distrust and makes reform harder. Second, prioritization systems neglect certain communities, especially marginalized ones. And third, environmental damage happens repeatedly but does not trigger long-term change. So the key takeaways here is that the numbers matter, but they're symptoms of a deeper system problem. We then looked at who has power in the system and who carries the consequences. We mapped stakeholders across a power spectrum. At the high power end, institutions like PennDOT control decisions and prioritization. Their focus is on maintaining infrastructure within constraints. At the low power end are residents in affected neighborhoods. They depend on these bridges daily but have no real input in decisions. We also looked at other stakeholders like UPMC has some institutional power, but it is not used towards infrastructure issues. And the Three Rivers ecosystem has no power, but absorbs all the environmental impact. This imbalance is not random. Historically, systems like redlining and highway construction reduced investment in Black neighborhoods and deprioritized their infrastructure. Even today, prioritization is based on traffic volume and property value. This means wealthier areas get preventive care while others get delayed or emergency repairs. At the same time, knowledge has always existed in inspections, reports, and lived experiences, but the system is not designed to act on it. So the key insights are that this is not a lack of knowledge problem, it is a power and accountability problem. The people most affected are the least included in decisions.
But we can't just design the interventions like that. First, we have to understand where exactly we are trying to go. So by 2075, Pittsburgh operates as a living, moving commons. Movement, water, and ecological health are governed as one single commons, which are then bound by the reciprocal relationships between rivers, neighborhoods, and the residents themselves. Bridges are not just seen as isolated infrastructure, but they are seen as the integrated network of the city itself, whose health is inseparable from the health of the communities and the water that they cross. But as we're sort of walking backwards from this vision, we first need to understand the things in this systems which do not work. So as we're talking about what kind of intervention ecosystem should exist exist, we sort of mapped out this ecology of interventions in assignment 5, which basically leads to the conditions that the existing system this simply does not support. So at this center, we have the Pittsburgh River Commons Governance Network, which is basically a uh, legally constituted multi-stakeholder body which has formal decision-making authority um, over bridge prioritization and maintenance. This basically acts as a keystone, and information basically feeds into this and then flows from it. When we're talking about what kind of information feeds into this, we're talking about the Commons app, which allows bridge sensors and watershed metrics to sort of have real time sensors, which then become publicly accessible knowledge. We talk about school curriculum, which makes sure that this knowledge sort of flows generationally. We talk about community bridge adoption, which basically ensures that lived experiences sort of change into relational knowledge. And when we specifically talk about the kind of decisions which flow from this network, we talk about laborers commons, which basically ensures that the knowledge and wages stay within this invested communities. We talk about the river ferries system, which provides alternate mobility. We talk about how decommissioned bridges can then serve as resident governed civic bridge spaces. And then we also see lighting and memorials, which basically means that the infrastructural harm and the infrastructural changes that are now taking place in Pittsburgh are visibly seen by the residents too. And it's important to understand that these sort of interventions do not occur at once, but they sort of occur on a lot of leverage levels simultaneously.
So while we've been talking about bridges, we kept noticing that the same conditions seem to produce two other things in Pittsburgh: persistent homelessness and the slow emptying of downtown. We do not know the intricacies of what the other teams have found, but from where we sit, all three seem to share some common ground. The first is fragmented governance. Bridge decisions, housing decisions, and downtown planning live in three separate agencies with three separate budgets, and no one has to answer for what happens when all three fail at the same time, and often in the same neighborhoods. The second is that transportation infrastructure in Pittsburgh has historically functioned as a separator. Interstate 579 cut the Hill District off from downtown in 1962, and the population went from 54,000 to 9,500. The bridges that replaced those connections were never maintained at the same standard as the ones serving wealthier areas. The third is that lived experience does not have a real way into the system. The knowledge that residents carry gets consulted. It rarely becomes a decision. And what we see across all three is the same geography, the same fiscal contraction, the same communities bearing the cost. And the Pittsburgh River Commons could be one entry point into a much larger repair. There are three things this project taught us. The first is that the problem was never really bridges, it was the system governing them. We came into this thinking about funding gaps, and we left thinking about who has the power to decide what gets fixed and what gets deferred. The second is that shifting power matters more than improving technology. The data on Fern Hollow existed for 16 years before it collapsed. Better sensors would not have prevented the failure. What was missing was a system that could act on what it already knew. The third is the most honest. The Pittsburgh River Commons is scaffolding, not necessarily a solution. We are not proposing that this fixes Pittsburgh bridge crisis, but what we are proposing is that it builds the structure that could receive the change when the conditions are ready for it. Pittsburgh as a living commons is definitely possible, but only if the conditions for change are built alongside the vision. And that is all we have. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, you guys. That was, again, excellent. Really excellent. Comments from the other teams before Gideon and I weigh in? Anybody else? Ashley, teams?
I was going to just say at the start of the presentation, talking about the numbers of bridges and kind of when they were built and how that kind of up economic cycle that might have facilitated that that investment might not align to when those kind of outlive their useful cycles, their useful, time with us. And so how do we build something where it's kind of not all happening at once? And I really liked the vision you painted of bridges as community building spaces and this entity as bringing the community together in a more general way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Others? Any other comments, reflections? Okay, over to you, Gid.
Well, yeah, to add to what Ashley said, I like the way bridges have been basically a way of controlling and dividing Pittsburgh, and they've had a purely, they've been kind of utilitarian, functional, but in your vision, the bridges become the thing, a defining feature of Pittsburgh life and community, but also community with, the river itself. I like the way it's like, in a way, bridges are often used, or particularly in Pittsburgh, to try and forget about the river which they are crossing. And in your vision, it's about remembering that watershed and forging a better connection with it. And I like that very much. Yeah. Maybe that's enough for the moment.
Okay. Well, I think it was excellent, and it was different than the first one. So it was excellent for different reasons. I mean, I thought you guys did such a good job, and that was kind of your final point in showing us how you entered the entire system through the doorway of bridge vulnerability. I mean, everyone is touching on how it's all interrelated, but you actually had the three problems and showed that there were connections, as did the previous team. But I think you really set up that doorway idea really well. I made a lot of notes here. I think that so often the question of infrastructure seems big, abstract, boring. Voters historically don't want to put money into that. Politicians don't want to put money into that, or at least not since Roosevelt and the New Deal. It's just not shiny, is it? And it takes a long time. But I think your team did a really beautiful job of pushing that narrative, that perception off the table. And I think your images of the future and that amazing story about the woman on the bridge with the tablet shows, and you said this, they are living arteries that can be sites of regeneration and healing, and really importantly, monitoring. So the idea that this bridge maintenance and the data that was ignored by institutions can be a living bottom-up approach with this brilliant idea of the River Commons Governance Network. I mean, that is such a powerful idea that could probably be applied to almost any ecology of solutions in any problem, because it refutes this top-down imposition of solutions by the powerful and flips it to a ground-up, user-centered and community-led, or at least a community-shared effort. And
Yeah.
think about how, sorry, Gid, go ahead.
No, you finish.
Well, that, and I also wanted to mention that I thought the way that you were talking about power in reference to the problem, everybody's mentioning it, but this power authority thing was really, really good. You just showed power and consequences in a way that just completely reframed the problem, as did the first group. Gideon, back to you.
Well, you talked about bridges as if they could become synergistic satisfiers, to use Max Neef's language, rather than singular satisfiers. Yeah, so maybe you could have used that language a bit more explicitly, but it was definitely there.
Yeah, I think weaving that in would be really, really good, because that image you had was a synergistic satisfier. And I also really like the way that it touched on other sectors like transport. You just, that Mobius diagram really hit home for me. It's like, oh, right now we've got a community of cars. And, you know, Buckminster Fuller always said that if in his era, the 60s or the early 70s, if alien life had visited Earth and looked down upon it, they might have mistakenly believed the cars were the entities inhabiting the planet. So on the one side, we've just got nothing but machines traversing these bridges. And then on the other side, you had people and animals and, you know, pedestrian society. So that was a beautiful contrast, I think. So I think that just about covers it. Really excellent presentation, everyone, and good innovation for recording it, because Maria couldn't be here today.
Thank you. It's very interesting that you talked about Max Neef, because we did have an entire slide on the theoretical frameworks that we've used, in which we've talked about not just Neef but also Meadows. But we first recorded the presentation with that, and it was very long. So then we thought that we need to condense it. So yeah.
Oh, thanks for letting us know that, Ramin. You guys might want to use that other recording as well. And you each have a copy of it for your interviews or presentations that you're going to make to other people. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, my name is Caroline, and I, along with my teammates Tamina and Zabel, make up Team Emergence, and we're excited to talk to you all today about our research for this past semester, looking at the wicked problem of downtown blight. So a brief overview of our outline for this presentation is a little bit different. We're starting with our process first, and then we're going to be going into our findings and then our proposal. So starting with process, main thing about this was trying to understand the evolution of our problem so that we can design for transition. So the first three assignments, we were looking at the problem, the people that are involved, the people that are impacted and that also impact the problem, the history of it, and then the last two assignments, assignment 4 and 5, we're looking at the future and designing for potential interventions. So assignment 1, again, like I said, we were looking at the problem. And we try to tie this problem to other wicked problems, similarly to the other group. I mentioned teen murmuration's homelessness wicked problem and how that ties with ours. And so we were looking at connections with that. And we were also looking at the 5 issue categories, which we carried over into our stakeholder assignment. And for our stakeholder assignment, we pinpointed that people with more power were Department of City Planning, politicians, real estate developers, while those with less power were the actual residents, local restaurant owners, and then one of the most overlooked stakeholders, which is the actual ecology of downtown Pittsburgh with the 3 rivers that are connected to it. And so in assignment 3, we were looking at the history and how trends and how they have affected one another. So one of the main things that we found was like white flight, and a lot of the issues that were impacting the other groups were also impacting us. And then we also carried over those 5 issue categories into this assignment. And then with assignment 4 and 5, we were looking at what could be. So we were looking at strategies and initiatives that were already in place in other places and that are already in place in downtown that we could build on. And then we were looking at that across the 5 like levels or like the 5 different scales. And then in our 5th assignment, this is a draft, so this is not final. We mapped those again with those issue categories, and it says triad of interventions, but we actually have a quartet of interventions, which we'll talk about later.
But before we move into the interventions, we wanted to, first of all, walk you through the findings. So based on the assignment, we tried to sum up our findings into 5 main issues that are currently contributing significantly to the downtown blight in Pittsburgh. The first thing that is important to highlight is that downtown's infrastructure is designed around the outdated planning model, which separated living and working spaces from each other and created districts and neighborhoods with just housing for living and the downtowns with a high concentration of office spaces for work. And this planning model created single-use districts, which failed to meet current demands for integrated work, live, and play environments. And since the majority of infrastructure in downtown is dedicated to office spaces and is designed to be only for working and not for living, downtowns today, and Pittsburgh, of course, is not an exception, is facing the lack of permanent residents and therefore permanent housing. Downtown's office monocultures were one of the areas most severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Since many businesses shifted to remote work, office buildings across the downtown became increasingly vacant. In Pittsburgh alone, 260,000 square feet of office space went unoccupied in downtown in 2024 only. And this trend was further intensified by the rise of e-commerce. Brick and mortar retail shifted online and commercial storefronts lost tenants. During the pandemic, many of these buildings even got bankrupt and closed entirely, which led to high vacancy rates. And together, these factors contributed to downtowns becoming ghost towns with neither a stable residential population nor a consistent flow of daily commuters. And the lack of people and underused buildings weakened surrounding street life, discouraged investment in maintenance, and reinforced perceptions of abandonment. And because there are very few permanent residents, as I already mentioned, and few daily commuters downtown, there is less need for social infrastructure like parks and community spaces where people would gather, linger, and socialize, or the everyday services like schools, grocery stores, and etc. And so many of these are missing or exist but are poorly developed. And this makes downtown feel less welcoming and harder to live and work in. And as a result, fewer people want to move there and the businesses are less likely to open or stay. And this creates a cycle, the endless cycle, where the lack of people leads to fewer services and the lack of fewer services leads to even fewer people.
And then while we were looking at like initiatives that are already taking place that are trying to address this issue, adaptive reuse kept coming up. And then we also looked at problems that come with that. And one of that is the complex regulatory frameworks that are in place for adaptive reuse. And so that would be more tied to Department of City Planning. But like another issue was that a lot of vacant buildings are still being held because of market speculation. And so you have these vacant buildings that property owners are not really willing to relinquish just yet. And they are also, I guess, they're not drawn to investing more into them because there is this perception and the stigma that downtown is abandoned and that people don't actually live there. But people do live there, and that's something that we wanted to address. And then another thing that I wanted to bring up again was the ecology, because the stigmatization, it also it means disinvestment. There's less attention on the issues of downtown, and so for stakeholders that don't have as much of a voice as like Three Rivers and downtown's ecology and the residents, this becomes a big issue.
So with these insights and initial learnings bring us to this final piece. And this final piece is trying to design this proposal for addressing blight in downtown Pittsburgh. But before the proposal, we want to talk briefly about a set of orienting principles that allow us to build this systems level change. And some of them are this idea of cosmopolitan localism, where needs should be met locally, the idea of self-organization, and that lasting change is unlocked from within, comes from communities. The idea of mutual aid, that the cooperation is the logic of durable social systems. Of course, pluriversal and relational ontologies, where ideas and solutions come and are really tied to the places. And Simpo is the idea that we are always building together. So along our research, we also examine things that are already in place, because Pittsburgh is not starting from zero, and there are active assets and initiatives that are addressing right now downtown blight, and our proposal is designed to leverage them. And there's real momentum to build on. First, we have this historic $600 million downtown revitalization plan that has brought together the state, the city, and private partners to a 10-year commitment. There's also the downtown conversion program that has directed over $36 million towards converting vacant offices into housing, including affordable units. And the downtown LERTA, that it's a tax that reduces developers' owe in taxes as long as they commit to creating affordable housing or jobs. And our vision of the future is a downtown that reimagines itself from within, bottom up, where commoning becomes the structure of social life and where collective stewardship shapes how the city governs and sustains itself. And to get there, we developed an ecology of solutions spanning these 5 domains that we have been working towards in all of the previous assignments, and also taking into consideration all of the different scales in which human lives unfolds. And we have a lot of proposals. Some of them, of course, target individuals and households directly, but others set the systemic conditions for communal life to flourish. We have them in the larger assignment, but right now we want to hand City Hall a concrete starting point, because we are convinced that the vision of the future cannot be built from one desk, and we need everybody's idea. So we want to hand over this quartet of interventions that they're designed to build on this momentum that Pittsburgh already has, so that we can call everybody and gather everyone towards this vision of the future. Our first idea in this sense that could be implemented almost immediately, it's an open innovation challenge, Pittsburgh City of Ideas, that will gather ideas from citizens to address downtown blight, and where winners can get resources to implement them. This can generate momentum, initiate participation, and also build this shared vision and ideas that downtown futures requires. And the second intervention is the city to lead by example. And this implies taking a vacant building in downtown and transforming it into a permanently free public space. That could be a library, a workshop, a cultural programming, also building in the cultural district that we already have. This will be a true commons. We are calling it Pittsburgh Utopia, and it is part of an investment that the city is already doing. This past weekend, the Arts Landing just opened, and this is also proof that the city is already investing in this direction.
And another intervention that we've been exploring is a downtown office to housing program, which would convert the highly concentrated vacant office buildings in downtown Pittsburgh into mixed income housing. This initiative would bring permanent residents to the area, helping to activate local business and diversify the neighborhood beyond its current office monoculture. And an increase in residents would also generate demand for much needed social infrastructure, such as schools, childcare, grocery stores, and community spaces, which is largely absent downtown today. And to make this transformation financially feasible, the program would require strong partnerships between the city, nonprofit organizations, and private developers, supported by public-private financing mechanisms. We propose a collaboration between the city and the university to implement the office to housing conversion project for a specific downtown building as part of a studio curriculum in architecture school in Pittsburgh, either at CMU or the University of Pittsburgh. And our last proposed intervention is achieving swimmable water quality in Monongahela, Ohio, and the Allegheny Rivers, which will not only have a huge environmental impact on Pittsburgh and improve the biodiversity, specifically in downtown, which is quite fragmented right now, but will also transform the riverfront from a liability into a social asset. And for that to happen, the water quality needs to meet EPA standards, but the impact will be significant. We can learn from European examples, especially from Paris, which transforms the banks of the Sena River every summer into an artificial beach. And Pittsburgh can also set up sittings and gathering spaces along the three rivers in downtown, which will allow people to relax, spend their time in the sun, in a recreational area, linger with their friends, or even meet new people. And this is a very short summary of many things that can be actually done to mitigate downtown blight, not just in Pittsburgh, but countrywide. And we are really hoping that with the right partnerships with people, with city officials, and us, the designers and the policymakers, we can together make a meaningful change. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really excellent presentation. Okay, you could probably stop screen sharing now. Are there comments from the other teams before we chime in? What did you think?
I felt inspired after. And I think the first intervention was interesting. The like that open source challenge, or oh, I don't think you called it an open source challenge, but the innovation challenge amongst the community. As a side thing that you could add, I just saw they were doing this in San Francisco and I thought it was super cute. But they turned the public library into an open space at night. So they had a big idea party and like there were a bunch of things happening. So that might be something you can use to kick off your innovation challenge in the city. Um, and I looked at when I was first moving, I was looking and I tried to move downtown and I was like, everything looks closed. So I ended up going to the south side because I just felt like there was no neighborhood. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, great comment. Anybody else? Okay, Gid, do you want to chime in? Did we lose Abel? Is she here?
She's right there.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, couldn't see you. Go ahead, Gid.
Yeah, that was yeah, as Teresa said, that was inspiring. Those last four proposed, I mean, they were developed at such a level of detail, felt as though they were eminently doable. And it was I think it was a very nice way. It was a very nice way of not making the whole thing too much about the problem, but making it about the solution or the solutions, which could inspire people to address the problem. I thought you outlined the problem really, really well, and clearly. And again, it was, I mean, there was such a vast amount of well-resourced, researched information in there that was all tied, yeah, it was all tied to research. So that was, I mean, I think Yeah, if you're doing a mayor's presentation, I think that would be very compelling because you showed that you had a lot of detail available, but you pulled out the most salient details and the most salient ideas for quick consumption. So yeah, very good.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And as you were presenting, I was remembering why we've never imposed a tight template on these presentations, because every group always finds their own way through the problem. And that journey they took should be reflected in the presentation so we can see how different they were. And yet each of you told the story and touched on the points necessary to fulfill the criteria in a really unique way. And this one took a completely different route through it, but it worked really well. It was simple, it was clear. I thought the structure and the sequence you took us through was effective and yet different, very different than the other two. Every presentation, and this one in particular, touched on other adjacent wicked problems. And I think that if you were presenting to a mayor's office and you had a bit more time, you could go into that in a little more depth so effectively that I think you would sell that department on systems change. And if the three groups could present to the mayor's office and you had one more semester, think of the ecologies of solutions you could come up with that would solve for all three problems simultaneously. And what I loved about the solutions you talked about is you can easily see how they could tip toward the other two very, very easily. But as Gideon said, I really liked the way you explained the problem, but quickly tipped over to what could be possible. And I think given the moment that we're all living through in history and the generations of younger people that are just right behind many of you, focusing on hope is such an important leverage point for change because it's so easy to tip into despair, isn't it? And especially for people in my age, we owe it to younger generations to try and be hopeful. And I think all three presentations, but especially this one, touched on that. It put hope forward and it gave us glimpses of a future that you can kind of smell and touch. And that is where the power of futuring, I think, really holds promise. And that's to an extent what Stuart Candy's work has touched on in experiential futures. How can we give people a whiff of what it could be like? And you absolutely did that. I really, really liked that you outlined what momentum was existing now and that could be leveraged. That's a lesson for all of us. And you really did that better than I think I've seen any group do it. When we give you the charge of creating a solution that, yeah, creates something new, but a solution that amplifies, scaffolds on something that exists. You guys did a great job of that.
Can I chime in there, Terry?
Please, please.
The way you showed the four, solutions, that you didn't harp on it, but you indicated, it felt both inspirational and aspirational, but also it seemed like you were showing like, hey, this thing already exists somewhere. You have a little bit of evidence that these kinds of things are happening. And I think that's really important in helping people kind of see the possibility and imagine like, oh, okay, this isn't some pie in the sky thing that you're proposing, like versions of it are happening. And I thought you did a nice job both in the beginning saying these are the things that are already happening, but then each of the solutions just giving a little bit of a nod to the fact that these things already exist in some way.
Yeah, really, really great job. So thank you for that. In general, I just want to say again that it doesn't escape us how difficult it is to have done the mountains of research that you did and have to condense it down to 10 minutes of a well-told story and to touch on every aspect. And all three, you did that in an excellent, excellent way. And I think, you know, if you all agree, what we'd like to do is share the link with some key constituencies who may want to watch the videos. And I don't know what Joe has reserved for Design Week, but I could imagine maybe this is a running video in one of the cases if it's still free. We always have a heck of a time every year trying to figure out how to spotlight this during Design Week. But I think this year we really have a good way to do that. We'll put the link down on the Zoom board, and I encourage you to make more of that. What else, Gideon, in general? I think here's the other thing I was going to say. So imagine you had been given 15 minutes with the mayor's office, and they're intrigued, and they say, okay, we got 15 more minutes. The thing each team would be able to do, and, you know, having for 30 odd years sat down with clients after having done research, made a presentation, it's what follows that presentation that usually cinches the deal. And very often what happens is if teams didn't have adequate time to do the depth of research that was needed, when they start asking you the hard questions, you're kind of stumbling around and fumbling for answers. Who has not been there? But you all would ace that follow-up, because I doubt if there's any question they could put to you, even though this is secondary research, there's probably not a question they could put to you that you couldn't answer. Now, your answer might be something like, yes, and that is what subsequent stakeholder research would turn up. But the thing I want to encourage you to do in your maps, especially in the template, is don't forget to talk about how all of these solutions are connected. You didn't have time to go into that in depth in this 10 minutes presentation, and that's okay. But don't forget to bring your best thinking to that, because that and the story of an ecology of funders is what is going to make a lot of people sit up and take notice of something like this. Diverse solutions, possibly funded from diverse revenue streams and sources to fund collective systems change. And then the other big story that I think all of you had was bottom up. Like, how is the community voice gonna be fed into this? It's kind of akin to, what do they call that, Gideon? Citizen science, where, you know, apps in the hands of a community can help generate data, exponential piles of data in real time. So all of those are pieces of your story that you can include in your Medium article, that you can, you know, link to with hyperlinks, and that can show up on your maps. And you are going to, each team is going to have such an amazing project to show. Okay, well, we got 10 minutes left for further discussion, questions, comments. Knowing this group, I think I know what we're going to do. What do you guys think? No?
This is a side note, but also possibly a place to start some stuff. Does anyone know if there's like a Code for America brigade that's active in Pittsburgh? Because I'm kind of looking, but it's like, it's so old that I'm like, well, maybe it's just not updated.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
Sorry. You know who you might ask, who is the knower of so many things in Pittsburgh, is Kristen Hughes.
Okay.
Kristen has been working up to her elbows in this community for 25 years.
Yeah, I also just asked Raylan, who was walking through, and I don't think there really is an active Code for America group right now.
Okay.
I think there has been at different points, but could be wrong, but I think that's the case.
Okay.
Do you think they would want, is there things that you're working on here that you think would be useful to bring to them?
Well, also, what are they working on?
Mhm.
And how might we merge things
Yeah.
and hand off ideas to people that are like here and
Yeah.
staying?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me wonder if there isn't also another intervention where, I don't know, you just convene a sort of open space session with all of the various community groups and activist initiatives. You guys know what the open space format is? It's very big in the UK. You convene a group of people and you go through a brainstorming session to raise ideas for topics that need to be dug into. And then the group sort of self-selects and then they have conversation sessions around them. But something like that might also be a great way to have like flash presentations and then with the goal of partnering up or seeing how different disparate initiatives could scaffold each other. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but it could be a very useful thing.
I just had this flashback of the Pecha Kucha presentations I used to have to give.
Yeah.
Lisa, when you said that, I was like, oh, the pressure.
Yeah, Anna is a Pecha Kucha expert, by the way. But yeah, that would be something to think about too. Well, if there's no other comments, I just want to thank you all again. You have done a Herculean amount of work this year and really good work. We are so honored to have been able to work with all of you in this class, and we can't thank you enough.